Harold Jenkins stood there in the middle of the community trash area, the Arizona sun beating down on his bald head, holding a single white envelope that felt heavier than it should. It was August 22nd, and the letter said he owed $4,850 for a special assessment on his patio cover. The paint was supposedly one shade off from the approved color. He had just tossed his morning coffee grounds into the bin when he opened it. The smell of burnt plastic from the sun-baked trash bags mixed with the faint scent of his own sweat. Harold blinked hard. He'd lived in this same house at Sunstone Villas for 42 years, built the damn patio cover himself back in '98 with his wife Linda. She always said the color reminded her of their first house in Ohio. The letter was polite, cold, signed by Margaret Kline, the HOA president. It gave him 30 days to pay or face fines, liens, and possible foreclosure. Harold's hands started shaking, not from fear exactly, but from something heavier. He looked around the empty trash enclosure. A broken plastic chair sat in the corner, the same one that had been there for 3 years. Nobody ever moved it. This wasn't just money. This house was the last place he still heard Linda's voice in the kitchen some mornings. The place where he still sat on the front porch at exactly 6:45 every day with his black coffee, talking to her photo like she was right there. And now they wanted to take it over some paint that nobody on God's green earth would notice, unless they were looking for a reason. He walked back through the blinding heat toward his street, the envelope crumpled in his fist. As he passed the row of identical beige houses, he saw Margaret Kline driving by in her white golf cart. She gave him the smallest smile. Not friendly, just satisfied, like she'd already won something. Harold stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. The $4,850 wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was realizing that these people could do this, legally, to a 78-year-old man who never missed a single HOA payment in 17 years. He stood there longer than he meant to, staring at his own front yard, the one he'd mowed every Saturday since 1983. The sun reflected off the slightly faded patio cover like it was mocking him, and that's when it really hit him. They weren't coming after his house. They were coming after what was left of his life. 2 days later, Harold found himself standing in the community clubhouse during the monthly residents' meeting, the air thick with the smell of old coffee and lemon disinfectant. He had written a polite letter explaining the patio cover was structurally sound, built with his own hands, and asked for a waiver. Margaret Kline looked at him from the head table like he was a minor inconvenience. She didn't even blink. "The rules are the rules, Mr. Jenkins. We can't make exceptions." Her voice stayed flat, almost bored. That was the first real punch to the gut, not the money. The way she said it, like his entire life in that house, meant nothing. The second punch came in the mail 3 days after that. A new letter, $312 late fee. Even though the 30 days weren't even up yet, Harold read it at his kitchen table and let out a short, bitter laugh. He actually laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the absurdity hit him harder than the anger. He laughed so hard his eyes watered, then wiped his face with the back of his hand like it was just dust. "Look, I can't," he muttered to the empty kitchen, the words dying in his throat. He stared at Linda's photo on the wall. She would have been furious. He was just tired. But the worst part came at the next neighborhood gathering near the mailboxes. People who used to wave at him every morning suddenly looked away. Margaret had been telling residents that Harold was refusing to contribute to community upkeep, that he was setting a bad example for the younger retirees moving in. She never raised her voice. She just planted the seeds and let them grow. Harold learned later that the $4,850 wasn't even going to fix anything in the common areas. It was earmarked for upgrading the gym equipment, the same gym that board members used for free while regular residents paid monthly dues. Tuesday the 9th, that's when it really sank in. He saw the financial summary someone had accidentally left on the copy machine in the clubhouse. The numbers didn't lie. He confronted her in the parking lot after a board meeting, the Arizona heat still radiating off the asphalt at 6:30 p.m. "You're using my money to fix your gym?" Margaret adjusted her sunglasses and gave the same calm smile he'd seen from her golf cart days earlier. "It's not your money, Mr. Jenkins. It's the association's. The assessment was voted on properly. If you don't like it, you're welcome to sell and move somewhere else." She said it so politely it felt like a slap across the face. No raised voice, no emotion, just pure legal cruelty. She wasn't breaking any rules. She was using them like a scalpel. Harold stood there watching her drive away in that white golf cart, the anger burning so hot in his chest he could barely breathe. These weren't just rules anymore. This was a system designed to slowly squeeze people like him out, and Margaret Kline knew exactly what she was doing. The money started draining faster than Harold expected. By the middle of September, he'd already pulled $2,100 from his savings account just to cover the first payment and that ridiculous $312 late fee. The bank statement sat on his kitchen counter next to a half-drunk cup of cold coffee. His hands still smelled like the metal from the trash enclosure where this whole thing began. He paid it, not because he agreed, because he was scared. Then the neighbors stopped talking to him altogether. The same people who used to sit with him on the front porch during evening walks now crossed the street when they saw him coming. One Tuesday afternoon, old Mrs. Ramirez, who used to bring him leftover tamales, actually turned her back when he waved. Margaret's whispers had done their job. The community he'd lived in for 42 years suddenly felt like enemy territory. Harold sat on his front porch at 6:45 like always, black coffee in hand, staring at Linda's photo. The faded patio cover looked the same as it had for 26 years. A small lizard skittered across the concrete step and disappeared into a crack. He watched it for a long time, longer than made sense. For the first time since Linda passed, he whispered to the empty chair beside him, "Maybe it's time we leave this place." Honey, the thought hit him like a truck. Selling, leaving the house they built their life in. He felt his chest tighten so hard he had to set the coffee down. The Arizona evening was still warm, but he suddenly felt cold all over. That night, he didn't turn on any lights. He just sat in the dark living room. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street outside. The house felt bigger than it ever had, emptier. He thought about all the mornings he'd spent here, all the quiet evenings talking to Linda's picture, all the small routines that made this place home. And now it was slipping away because of some paint shade and a woman who smiled like she was doing everyone a favor. He stood up and walked through the dark hallway to the front door, pressing his forehead against the cool wood. The weight of everything pressed down so hard he could barely stand. For the first time, he understood how people just gave up, how they signed the papers and walked away broken. To this day, I still don't understand why Margaret Kline picked him specifically. There were plenty of other old houses with small violations. Why his? He was still standing there in the dark when the loud knocking started. 3 sharp bangs at 11:47 p.m. exactly. The sound cut through the silence like a hammer. The knocking at 11:47 p.m. wasn't Margaret. It was 3 other residents from the block, standing awkwardly on Harold's porch with flashlights and nervous faces. They'd seen the financial papers too. One of them, a retired accountant named Bill, had found more irregularities. Turns out the special assessments had been funneled quietly for years into upgrades only the board enjoyed. Harold didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, he was already digging through old folders in the garage, the smell of dusty cardboard and motor oil thick in the air. He copied everything, every receipt, every email chain, every bank transfer that didn't add up. His hands shook the whole time, but not from fear anymore, from something sharper. 2 weeks later, at the emergency board meeting in the clubhouse, Harold stood up in front of 47 residents. His voice cracked at first. "Look, I never wanted trouble, but this ain't right." He laid out the documents one by one on the table. The $4,850 that went straight to new treadmills and massage chairs for board members. The pattern of targeting older homeowners who couldn't fight back easily. The quiet campaign to make him look like the problem. Margaret Kline sat perfectly still, her face blank as always. But this time the room didn't stay quiet. Mrs. Ramirez spoke up. Then Mr. Chen from the next street. Then a dozen more voices, all people who had stayed silent for years. They were tired of the fines, tired of the control, tired of watching their neighbor get crushed over nothing. The board tried to shut it down. They couldn't. The truth had already spread through the neighborhood like dry desert wind. By the following Tuesday the 9th, a petition was circulating with 63 signatures calling for an independent audit and Margaret's removal. Harold stood in front of his house on a quiet Thursday morning, the faded patio cover still there after all these months. He wasn't alone this time. 6 neighbors stood with him. Bill brought coffee. Mrs. Ramirez brought tamales wrapped in foil. They didn't say much. They just stood there together under the Arizona sun. He looked at the house he and Linda had lived in for 42 years. The same porch where he still drank his black coffee every morning at 6:45. For the first time in months, he smiled. Not bitter, not broken, just tired and real. Margaret eventually stepped down. The assessment was reversed. But Harold knew the real win wasn't the money. It was the moment people stopped looking away. He stood there silently for a long time, staring straight ahead. The group of neighbors around him, no big speech, no dramatic music, just an old man who refused to let them take what was left of his life. And in that quiet moment, you can't help but wonder, if they tried this with him, what would you do if it was your house, your street, your last place that still feels like home?